Excellent. So hi, everyone. And yeah, welcome. So both the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement at Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, Kathy Boblet, and I, Ron Elitzur, President of the Ross Alumni Tech and Innovation Alumni Association, would like to thank Dave Cole, the co-founder and CEO of Open Raven, for joining us today for our CEO Tech Talk on the topic of cybersecurity, reimagining data security for the modern era. So I'd like to introduce Dave Cole by starting with his bio. So Dave's fingerprints are visible across the cybersecurity industry from his 26 years working as a leader in consulting, both at Deloitte and ISS, enterprise products such as Foundstone, CrowdStrike, and Tenable, and consumer products such as Norton. Currently, Dave is CEO and co-founder of Open Raven, a Kleiner Perkins backed post-Series B company focused on reimagining data security for the modern era. A little bit about Dave's background. So as Chief Product Officer of CrowdStrike, Dave took a nascent product line with a handful of small customers back in 2013 and established it as a disruptive force in the industry that currently dominates endpoint security. He was also Chief Product Officer at Tenable, where he steered the team through an aggressive growth phase, culminating in a successful IPO in the summer of 2018. In early 2019, Dave and Jack Daniel, founder of the B-Sides Conference, started the Security Voices podcast as a sponsorless show focused on highlighting the diverse people and perspectives in cybersecurity. The podcast has released over 50 episodes and counting. Dave is a frequent spokesperson, making appearances on NBC, CNN, and elsewhere, while speaking at industry events such as RSA, Black Hat, and B-Sides Las Vegas. He has been a contributing author to a number of information security publications and books, including Crimeware, Understanding New Attacks and Defenses. Dave has authored a number of US patents during his time at Foundstone and Symantec. Dave is an investor focused on helping to grow businesses in his hometown of Los Angeles, where he resides with his wife and son. Dave holds a bachelor's of business administration from the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. He's currently a member of the board of University of Michigan School of Information, as well as Inspective. Dave, welcome. So I'd like to jumpstart the discussion by asking if you can please cover at a high level the history of cybersecurity leading up until today and how it has shaped your career and allowed you to build Open Raven.
Yep, great, will do. And thanks for the intro. And if you were listening to that and think, my God, this guy is an inch wide and a mile deep, you'd be absolutely right. So everything I'm going to tell you today has an incredibly biased perspective of someone who has not only worked in tech, but really only done cybersecurity the whole time. Now, I've explored different angles of it, and it's a massive industry in and of itself. But, that's the perspective I'm speaking from. And, for anybody who's young in their career, building up really deep domain expertise has been awesome, especially if you intend to start a company. So there's a lot of benefits to being a generalist too, and to going across different industry and cross training. I represent someone who's gone incredibly deep in one industry for a maybe inadvisable duration and length of time. So I'll let you draw your own conclusions on that. But yeah, it's been 26 years. I graduated with a BBA in '96. I had no intention of going into business school when I started at U of M. I grew up in Battle Creek, Michigan. So, hand-back southwestern Michigan, with Kellogg's and Post, the smell of cereal in the air every morning, and ended up at Michigan. It was amazing. Like I'm incredibly grateful for my time at Michigan, both the education I got, the people I met. I was there during the Fab Five, which was stinking awesome. Missed Tom Brady's national championship in the 1997 team by 1 year, but who's complaining? So I when I got like I want to say it was in my sophomore year, and I realized, and I applied to the BBA program, got in. And when I got into the BBA program, I had no clue what I wanted to do. And I took an amazing class. I believe this professor is still there. His name's Scott Moore. And the interwebs were taking off, this crazy, browser called Mosaic and soon Netscape and everything else. And it was for the first time I realized that was exactly what I wanted to do. It was exciting. It was cool. I had to learn it. So I plunged myself into programming courses that summer. And I inadvisably took C programming in my senior year when I had an acute case of senioritis, and I got my butt kicked by C programming. So thank God I saved my pass fail. But all of that was in great context. Around the same time too, as I finally realized what I wanted to do really late in my junior year and kind of retooled myself for that, I also fell in love with Los Angeles. I came out and I visited once, and I just had that feeling. I'm like, this is home. I'm like, first off, the weather's beautiful, and it was a particularly cold winter. Like, secondly, the people are beautiful. Third, the people are happy. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of downside to it. And I'd always grown up wanting to scuba dive and wanting to be near the ocean. So it was a no-brainer. So I told every company that I interviewed with, and the business school did an amazing job of bringing through recruiters and so forth. I was, in hindsight, it allowed me to be incredibly lazy. I learned later how much I had to work to actually find the right gig and so forth. So don't take that for granted. And really what happened is I told everyone that I was interviewing with, and it wasn't hard to get a job in tech at that point because everything was taking off and the people in the university had the hot skills. So I basically said, yeah, that's fine. Job sounds fine. I didn't really have a strong opinion about what I wanted to do, but I wanted to be in LA. And Deloitte and Touche at the time said, sure, kid, you want to be in LA, God bless. You're going to be doing like information security and computer security. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I'm going to get out of that crap in a year. Like, I'll be in and out like convenience shop. I failed miserably at that plan. And thank God I did, as I just got deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. And at this point, it's pretty clear I'm not coming out the other side. Like, this is it. This is the career. So I took the job, I got into it. And at the time it was interesting. So I'm going to try, and it's not hard to tell you a career story. So since I'm a masochist, I decided this morning I would interweave the history of computer security. That's all, so if I mumble my way through parts of this, and if you have questions, by all means, raise your hand. Please don't make this a monologue. I'll hurt myself. But at the time, what was happening in computer security is there was a tool released that everybody was losing their minds over. It was called Satan. And in computer history, in computer security history, we love colorful names and things that sound ominous and so forth, right? Like, it's a bunch of sci-fi and fantasy geek and goth kids and lock picking and the rest of it. Like, that was a lot of the origins, and a lot of military juxtaposed against it. It was a motley crew of human beings. And there was a guy named Dan Farmer and Witsy Venema. And they released a tool that acronymed out to Satan. And it was the first time people realized, oh my God, there's like a hacking tool out there where you can analyze networks and see the holes in them and potentially get in. And by the way, there's a lot of cool stuff being done at the University of Michigan at that time in security. I just didn't know about it because I didn't care. To me, it was just a ticket to LA. I realized in hindsight that there was a lot of cool stuff happening in Michigan that I just wasn't aware of because I was way more interested in the Fab Five and everything else that was going on. So, is what it is. By the way, I did do the first website at the University of Michigan Business School. I was a consultant for an amazing guy named Tom Shaheen. So I worked for the business school for about a year and wrote a bunch of really crappy code. So, I'm pretty sure that none of it is there. Like, one of them was to analyze web server logs to justify having a website, which was a thing. And I think my code was crappy enough that Tom punished me by making me do an all text site so that people were using the links browser would be cool with it. So anyways, long story short, security was just starting to become a thing when I got out to Deloitte and Touche, and people had started using firewalls, and the firewalls were a thing. And every time people talked about security at that moment, people would say, well, here's a picture of a castle. and the castle had the firewall, which was the drawbridge, and you only let trusted things across the drawbridge and so forth. And this is important for later because it's very different than the model of security that we have today. Like, that world is gone. But that was kind of where it started, where these hacking tools like Satan. There was another one called Internet Scanner, which was started by a guy named Chris Klaus, which later turned into a massive computer security company called ISS, which I joined after Deloitte. And he did that while he was at NASA. And for similar reasons that Dan Farmer and Witsi Venema did the Satan tool. So they were basically assessing those castle walls, the moat and the rest of it, to carry forth the analogy, to see where the vulnerabilities were. So people were increasingly aware of misconfigurations. And the book that was out that time, and this is a seminal novel in computer security. This is like the OG computer security book. Like, you have to read it if you get into it. It's called The Cuckoo's Egg. I forget the guy's name. It's Clifford Stoll. I just remembered it. Wonderful. Stoll. So you kind of have to read The Cuckoo's Egg if you're getting into security, because it's this amazing story of this guy who's a system administrator who recognizes an accounting error, and he keeps following it down, going down the rabbit hole further in his curiosity. It's an amazing story. It happened, I think, at a Berkeley I think it was an astronomy lab. So anyways, that was kind of the book that got a lot of people into it at the time. It piqued people's curiosities early in the industry. And there's been others that have come out since, and a series of really bad computer security movies, and some pretty awesome ones too. So that moved on, and the market that started to develop in that young security market when I was at Deloitte and Touche, the thing that people started doing at that time really was doing penetration testing. And what that is, and it's kind of popular vernacular now, but it was very cloak and dagger, and it was very expensive back then too, is people would pay you to assess their security because it was this dark, arcane art. Now, that evolved over the course, and this is going into the late 90s. And that little company that started in Georgia out of Chris Klaus called Internet Security Systems started to turn into a titan because more and more people realized that they could use tools. So this is the grown-up version of Satan called Internet Scanner. And there's also people developed these kind of basically burglar alarms for networks as well, called an intrusion detection system. And what that did is effectively start looking at the traffic coming into people's castles, their networks, and tell them, whether or not they saw bad things. So I left Deloitte and went, and I wanted to get even deeper in the tech, and I wanted to do penetration tests, and I wanted to respond to incidents and so forth in the late 90s. And by God, there was a lot of them. And at that point, it was my job to basically use those tools, set them up, and start to help organizations mature in their practices. So I did that for a while. And that was a really, that was a great run. It was a great company. And this is the company, like if you go to Georgia, like I did earlier this year, there's a vibrant computer security community there that was really, owes a lot of its roots to internet security systems and what happened. And you see that kind of across the US. In Ann Arbor, there's a great security community who's led by a gentleman named Doug Song, who some of you may know from Arbor Networks and so forth, who's just an amazing guy. And so there's these pockets. And of course, Georgia Tech has played a role in fostering that too, as the University of Michigan has played a role in it in Ann Arbor. So I was very fortunate to be at ISS, but I also, while I was a consultant there, I realized that there was a bigger opportunity. They were far more interested in building new products. And what was happening was the Internet Scanner product would turn out these 500-page reports, and people's internet presences were getting larger and larger. Basically, the castles got bigger. The walls, were starting to get porous because they were so tall and they were so wide, and I looked at it and said, and I was talking to the product team at ISS and said, hey, this product isn't working anymore. Like, you got an awesome start, but these businesses, like in between times, like we're using these tools, but they need to turn this into a discipline. And the analogy that we used was, look, the penetration test is sort of like your trip to the dentist. It's your deep cleaning. You do it like twice a year. You still need to brush and floss. And what was happening at the time is a parade of Microsoft vulnerabilities were coming out, and it was starting to get really bad. The Melissa virus had come out at that time too, and the threat landscape was coming up, and ISS was chasing the threats, the vulnerabilities they kind of forgotten about. And it kind of culminated for me. I was in Sun Microsystems, and they were saying, look, this tool, we have to operationalize it. We need the daily brushing and flossing. Instead of vuln assessment, we need vuln management. Well, ISS was chasing other products, and they didn't really want to do that anymore. I ran into some guys. One of my consultants left. I had a small team of consultants there. He left to this company called Foundstone. And he said, Dave, you got to come to Foundstone. I said, really? Why? He's like, the thing you just did at Sun Microsystems and what you kind of designed that they want to build it. I said, amazing. I'll talk to them because there's a huge opportunity here. So this was right around 2000. So I met these two gentlemen who have turned out to be icons in the security industry, George Kurtz and Stu McClure. And basically, we kind of had a meeting of the minds and said, yes, we see the same thing, the same market opportunity. Why don't you come and build products? Which was amazing because I had a lot of ideas. The downside was I had no clue how to build products. Like I was a consultant. So in true startup naivete and young in my career, I'm like, yeah, I can do a product. Why couldn't I do a product? I just wrote this report about how you could build this. Why couldn't you build it? So I bumbled my way, through the first few years, as did everybody else in the company. And this is when startups were young too. So it was a lot more forgiving. If we did what we did back then today, we wouldn't have made it past the first 6 months. So the world's, come a long ways from then. So we started building this product, and we went at this for 4.5 years. And this was a chance to build a category, to basically take some initial idea of vulnerability assessment and turn it in to a discipline, to an organizational discipline in security. And it remains today one of the core disciplines. And you're looking at this and saying, by God, that Foundstone was probably a raging success. It was not. And it wasn't. Partly because, go ahead.
Were you in like a product development, product manager type capacity? How were you speccing it out for the engineers? Like, tell us a little bit about that as well.
I was product manager and product marketing, and I got into it a little bit. And we got the first version of the product out and started iterating. We did a lot of work with Bank of America. And those of you who are technical, one of the big challenges we had is Bank of America had a Class B plus of public IP address space, like a massive stinking footprint. And the challenge was, they're like, look, man, like we need a scan to complete in less than a day. Like we need to be able to scan all of this. I don't want a 500-page report. I want you to scan everything. Don't even turn on vulnerability checking. Just tell me where there's crazy services out there. I don't want to see any telnet. I don't want to see any FTP that isn't, that's funky, that I don't expect. And down the line, I don't want to see all these different protocols. That was a lot of early security assessment, was like, just like make sure there isn't a door open that doesn't need to be there. And sadly, like there's still a lot of that today, if we're honest. And that's a lot of the way that people get hacked. But having said that, like back then, there wasn't even like a port scanner that you could get that type of assessment on. And we built that. We focused on it relentlessly with what we had, which was, again, compared to today, it was like banging two sticks together to make a fire, right? But having said that, we got it to work. And we were able to, basically get the business to a decent place. I did about probably, I think like 18 months of doing product by myself. And then I brought in a guy who was awesome, who helped me and kind of showed me the ropes and got us to a decent spot. We eventually sold the company to McAfee in what was I'd say like an okay acquisition for everybody involved. Like we had a lot more learnings and scar tissue than wealth afterwards.
That's incredible. And just to understand, like, so you worked with Bank of America, you work closely with them, and that's how you developed the product, or were you also, coming up with features on your own? How closely did you work with
Yeah. Well, it's something that both Stu and George have went on to do, and it's kind of I wouldn't say it's controversial, but it's a little bit different the way that they've gone about building products. So they were also at PricewaterhouseCoopers before that, and they had a deep consulting background. So we actually had a services team and a product organization. And one of the mistakes we made is we catered to the consultants too much because they're right in your ear and they're in the business. but we got some really good things from them too. Now, as we go through the story here, one of the things the industry learned, and certainly Stu and George were kind of the scions of this, to give them credit, were if you do it right, that consulting team can be a huge benefit for bringing back learnings from the market, and they can be lead gen as well. If you screw it up, you will kill your product. Though there's clear boundaries you have to draw between a services organization and a product organization. And at times, as a product leader, what it means is you have to say, yes, consultant, I understand you. I totally get that you need that. That's not what the customer needs. And seasoned product management, like I became later, you kind of listen for that and you can see where they're taking you down one of their use cases and say, okay, that's not quite what the customer wants. And in that instance, it's your job in product. Like, there's certain product leaders who are like, oh, well, it's your job to say no and defend the team. Like, no. It's your job to say yes and to figure out a way to get to yes. And in those instances, I just told them, I said, you should go use another product. Like, you have a really important problem to solve, friend, and it's important to the business. And I want you to have crazy service revenue because we both own shares. Like, God bless, like, use another product. And then maybe later, like, you can tell me what you like about it. We'll see if it doesn't coincide with something we need to build. So yeah, we donked it up like at Foundstone, and we just didn't, we were all learning for the first time. We did all right. Like, it wasn't awful, but yeah, more learnings and scar tissue than wealth generated for sure. But we also blazed forward and created a new category. And there's a lot of strategies towards product. If you're smart, you go into an existing category and build a better mousetrap. If you're masochistic and want to shoot for the stars, you try and create a whole new category of thing, right? And that's kind of my proclivity, because apparently I'm masochistic and I love that sort of like market puzzle and trying to create something that people didn't know that they needed yet. So that was what we were trying to do, was basically take this thing that had gone from a point and shoot scanner and turn it into operational discipline. So, by the way, is this at the right level? Is this interesting?
Yeah, this is
cool.
Right up. Yeah.
All right. So after that, I promptly quit. I was done. We did the acquisition and I looked at it and said, I will do any product in the world at this point. I will not do that product. Like, if anybody needs a product manager for hair gel, like, here I am, but I will not do that Foundstone product. And I quit and I went to Australia without another job. And I'd become a decent scuba diver at that point. I went out and dove the coral reef and basically rode in a bus up to Cape Tribulation and cleansed myself after 4.5 years of hard yards in a startup, and vowed that I would never do that again, and so forth. And all the dumb things you say when you're pretty much destined to do the same thing again later. But I looked at it and said, I need to go inside a big company. I love building products. Like, this is so much fun. This is so cool. The creative process and being with other people and being aligned and building something that people love and use and solves a big problem. Like, I was addicted. I was in. And sure enough, even to this day, I still love it. It is the funnest job for me personally. And I decided, like, I better go inside a big company where there's people who actually know what they're doing. I kind of know what I'm doing now, but it would be good to go into a company where people really know what they're doing. Like, that would be nice. So I went into Symantec, and at the time, the Symantec stock had split like 3 times in 18 months. He had a rock star CEO and John Thompson. And I looked at it and said, well, this is where I can learn to build products at scale. And this will be great, right in my backyard in Los Angeles. So I went in and I started out, I took a job naively as director of product management for security response. And what that was an operational in-house job, basically, where I was responsible for all of the antivirus content, all the intrusion prevention signatures, all of the engines, all of like the anti-spam and anti-phishing signatures, and all of these things, which had started to become a thing. At this time, like, adware, spyware was going bonkers. This is 2004, 2005. And it was my job to make sure that we were the fastest in terms of delivering antivirus detections, making sure that we like caught up. We were getting our butts kicked in anti-spyware and anti-adware and the rest of it. We were okay in some other areas, and the job was to both fix all those operational flows and also make sure that we were like the kings of the media. So that's where I did a lot of my broadcast media and did a lot of broadcast media training, which is incredibly different from talking to you all right now. Like if you've ever done it, it's like short sound bites and so forth. Really interesting experience. I'm glad I don't do it anymore. It turns out you do it for a while and you learn it, and it's not particularly enjoyable. It was fun to have done. This is way more fun. So I did that for a while, and it was really interesting. I mean, I had to solve, there were about 20 active lawsuits when I got in because we didn't have standards for how we were detecting adware and spyware. There's real businesses behind these. They were objectionable businesses in most instances, but there was real businesses behind this. And this is when like malware and stuff started to turn criminal. So around this like 2003 to 2006, the security industry took a pretty dark turn. You know, we went from like people who were screwing around in most instances and things that were kind of annoying or maybe even playful, but it wasn't espionage, it wasn't crime, it wasn't super like cash driven, to where it went 100% in that direction. And it was a big change, you know, a cataclysmic shift. And, you know, we also saw the beginnings of ransomware back then too. Like, I know it's a big thing now, but we saw the beginnings of it. The difference was it was super easy to follow the trail of money. You know, even then, it's kind of funny. There was a guy who started something called e-gold in the Bahamas, you know, so somehow like the Bahamas and cryptocurrency and the rest of it are always, you know, there's always been this relationship, I think, for somewhat obvious reasons, but it's regardless. I did that for a while, and I said, this was a heck of a lot of fun. I was doing a lot of things. I started the first podcast for Symantec. I started the first blog. You know, there was a bunch of really cool things going on, but at the end of the day, I wasn't building products. And I looked at it and said, I have to get back to building products. I'm like, this has been a cool detour, but this isn't what, you know, I signed up for. And I got the opportunity to run Norton Internet Security and Norton Antivirus at the time. Now, and the attraction was it was a $1.2 billion business at that moment. I was like, yes, please, like I'll take that. Like I need to learn to build products at that scale. And it was fascinating. First off, the products were notoriously fat and slow, and we had to fix it. Like nobody wanted to use it anymore. So I got in and I'm thinking, woo, I've been doing like operations stuff for like 2 years and doing media things. I'm going to do core product. I'm going to build me some features. Yeah. And the head of engineering and the head of product, amazing guy named Rowan Trollope, visionary leader, he came in and said, we're not doing any features. Matter of fact, we're probably going to yank a bunch of features out because we've got to build the lightest and the fastest product in the market. That's what everyone wants. And at first I was crestfallen. I'm like, oh my God, I took this detour and I came in here and now like I basically can't do anything. And, you know, I kind of whimpered to myself and threw my little pity party. And then I wrapped my head around it and realized that we could turn everything that he wanted into a feature. And it turned out to be this amazing, iconic release that set the business back on the right trajectory. And it was, for me, it was a wonderful lesson in the power of focus. And we distilled it down to metrics that I can still remember this day. It was 10 by 10 by 100. And, you know, it was, let's see if I can, I know the numbers. It was 1 by 10 by 100. It was 1 minute install. And so, you know, in consumer products and all products, those first moments are really important. And it was too slow to install. So Rowan basically took a couple thousand person organization and said, you're going to do one thing and one thing only, and everyone's going to line up behind this. And it was just incredibly powerful. And we took a fat and slow and bloated product in 1 year and turned it into a lightning fast product that installed in 1 minute, used 10 megs of working RAM, and had 100 megs on, basically on the desktop, which was a huge change from where it was before. And yeah, there wasn't any new features, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. So it was this amazing release. And we continued to work on it. We fixed the protection profile of the product and so forth. And I had a heck of a lot of fun. Like it was good being inside a big company. I had a great boss. I learned a ton. Being in startups is fun too. And the way that I look at this is like, every career has seasons to it. Sometimes the big companies are great. You can be super innovative, and sometimes the young companies are better. So, I don't think of people in terms of big or small company or so forth, or startup guy and otherwise. Either way, like you can be incredibly innovative in a big company, and especially in some instances, because you don't have to worry about all the other things you have to worry about when you're in a small company. Like I didn't worry about people's healthcare benefits when I was inside Norton. At first, we worried about fixing the products, and then we worried about the fact that everything was moving beyond the PC, and our business was built on the PC. So I started their kind of march beyond the PC, and then Symantec's leadership turned over, and me and my partner, a gentleman by the name of Jens Meggers, who I was actually just with last night, a whole bunch of the consumer team had been let go. Symantec was the composite of both an enterprise and a consumer business. And basically the consumer team, there was turmoil, there was a whole bunch of things that happened at King's Landing, and there was turmoil in Westeros. And a whole bunch of folks got let go, including most of the consumer team. And Jens and I looked at each other, and we were given the entire endpoint business, like a $3 billion business, me heading up product and him heading up engineering. We're like, sweet, let's lock arms. Like, let's fix this thing. And they patted us on the head and they said, oh, you're cute. They said, you think we gave this to you to fix it? We gave this to you to wring out efficiencies because this endpoint market is dead. And we looked at each other and we're like, that doesn't seem right. I said, because all of these customers that we talk to, all these enterprise customers, which, we've been at consumer for half a decade now, and we've been deep into it. And I learned a ton of things about pricing, about UX, about, design for conversion. Like consumer is an amazing education for anyone who's done enterprise. All the things about ad-based revenue and the things you learn. Like I recommend to anyone who's doing enterprise products to take a detour into consumer. It is just amazing what you learn. But
that's very insightful, definitely. And as we have about 20 minutes.
Yeah. I'll wrap it up for you. So
no. We want to hear more, and we also want to hear about Open Raven, and just get to that too. So, but fascinating.
Yeah. So I'll pull you through the rest of this pretty speedy. So basically, at that point, the endpoint market was being reborn. There was a bunch of young companies coming in to redo it, but they just didn't see it. The sell-by date of their beliefs in this, that this was a business to be cash cowed, basically was completely wrong, and it was ripe for being reinvented. And sure enough, I left Symantec at that point. I'm a maker, a builder, not a maintainer, and peeled off. And I went back to George, who I'd worked with at Foundstone, who said, hey, McAfee's not going to fix their enterprise products. I said, that's funny. Symantec's not going to fix them either. Then, well, let's go take their customers. And what was happening in security at that time was it was shifting towards us going from malware and automated attacks to a world of what we called advanced persistent threats, which is a euphemism for human-based attacks, because nation state hacking from China, from Syria, from Russia, from everywhere was really exploding at that time. There was other things happening too around cyber insurance, which had threatened to be a big thing for a long time and finally started to mature. Certifications at that time started to become a big thing. Like, how many of you heard of SOC 2 certifications? Yeah, like they're now a big thing, and the companies that facilitate those go by names of Vanta, Leica, Tugboat Logic and so forth. All of those are turning into pretty big companies as well. So anyways, all this was happening in the background, and the cloud was really starting to take off. So CrowdStrike, where I was the first chief product officer there, I got it from kind of its troubled years in its Series B through its Series C round of funding. It eventually went on to IPO. And this was a case where, unlike Foundstone, where the category that we started to build, we didn't get to be the leader. CrowdStrike basically reinvented this next gen endpoint market. And, we just cut, and some of this is serendipitous. In Foundstone, we got hit by basically 9/11, which shut down the markets and everyone buying. In CrowdStrike, we had the opposite example where we got into this and the DNC hack, the Democratic National Convention hack, happened, which catalyzed the market. So you can't underestimate just how powerful timing is with these startups. Sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. And there's a maxim that says, like, if you have to choose between having a great team, a great idea, or great timing, you always choose great timing. And it's, I think it's exactly true. As moving on, so we did CrowdStrike. I got them through that point and moved on. And I went to a company called Tenable at that point. The reason I went to Tenable is, well, there's a number of them, but I looked at it and there was work left to be done in vulnerability management. And I wanted to have the opportunity to take a company through an IPO. So I went in, and my job was to basically take them as an on-prem company with an on-prem product to get the cloud product out and to basically get the product ready for an IPO. The challenge was it had been a mom and pop kind of run company for about 12 years, bootstrapped, incredibly impressive business out of Columbia, Maryland. And basically it had taken $250 million in venture capital at a time, like right now, like $250 million rounds are normal now. At least they were in the heady days of last year. This was a big deal. This was the biggest investment by Excel Partners, I think at the time, in security, and then by Insight afterwards, Insight Partners, who did a massive growth round. So they basically took a company that had been mom and pop for a long time and dumped $250 million of rocket fuel into it, largely into go-to-market. And at that point, there was some work to be done on the product side, and a cloud platform to get out. And also we had to prove that we were staying current with the times. What was happening then is containers and Kubernetes were becoming a massive thing. And, and it was obvious that open source was also massively important as well. And cloud was here to stay. And we were in the midst of the cloud transition. But also at the time, industrial security was starting to become a big deal. After being a sleepy backwater for a long time, people realized this critical infrastructure, your SCADA systems, your Modbus, all these things, these plants have to be protected too, because they're all getting connected to the internet. So these forces basically brought me into there to do a few things to get them through the IPO. One was to forge a relationship with Siemens and introduce an industrial security product. So we looked like a bigger, more impressive enterprise security company. And I rebranded one of the things we had that was called Passive Network Scanner as industrial security. And we also retooled the product and invested in it. And that was part of showing that we had a whole bunch of greenfield and total addressable market that we could go after as a public company, which is one of those really important things for that stage. Now, we also did some things with container security. So you can see just laying down that TAM so you can tell a really big story that you can deliver on for the investors. So, and, this is one of the things that, if you get a deep product career, you realize like there's things that you do inside a big company when you're mature about building customer lifetime value and portfolio mechanics. There's things you do with a company that's in an IPO. And there's things you do very different when you're a fledgling company like OpenRaven. So after we got the company through the IPO, I left Tenable and went off to do OpenRaven. And the insight here was that much like with back in the day with like a Bank of America, like I mentioned, who at the time couldn't see their internet presence, and much like at CrowdStrike, where there's people who couldn't see the adversaries, they couldn't see the attackers inside their networks. There's this increasing problem where security leaders said, I can't see my data. When I'm in the cloud at scale, there's massive amounts of data, so much so that it sprawls out. there's so many people handling it now, and it starts with the data team, but it goes to the sales team, the product team, and everybody else. And it's just too easy for super sensitive data, which is now hyper regulated in many instances, to end up everywhere and for people to make mistakes. And the mistakes that people make, are largely what leads to the breaches. Everybody wants to believe that it's the boogeyman and it's the bad guys, the NSA hacked you, or the crime group out of, Belarus or wherever. Oftentimes you just left the door open because it's so easy and people are moving so fast. And there's a cute little test that you do that, we do sometimes with people when you sit down and having a casual conversation. You're like, so who exactly is responsible for data hygiene in the organization? And, it's one of these, right? It's like, it's not, you realize pretty quickly that much like that practice of vuln management, like I said before, which everyone kind of knew that they should do sort of, that's where we are with like cloud data security in many instances, where there isn't a discipline around it. There isn't anyone terribly responsible. It's very embryonic. It's going to grow up pretty fast. So we saw this in 2019 and said, this is a challenging one. It's a big one, but we're going to go after it because there's a chance to plant a flag on this market. So we took seed capital, me and my co-founder, from a fund here called Upfront in Los Angeles, a woman named Karen Nortman, and then have been growing the company ever since up until today, where we've completed our Series B funding. So with a group called Pelion, Kleiner Perkins, a bunch of independents and so forth. So that was a mouthful. And where we are today in the security industry, just to kind of give a little bit of zeitgeist to wrap this up, is that Castle is long gone. When you hear zero trust, and it came up in an executive order, that's a big part of where we are today, which is forgetting about this network. Everybody's working from home. They're working from different places. This is about authenticating each person, individual, as opposed to trying to keep the castle walls up. The castle doesn't exist anymore. Supply chain, open source is incredibly important. Many of you heard of probably SolarWinds and what happened there, where they got penetrated, and we all realized we're immensely interconnected. So the world today is very much about zero trust. It's about industrial security still. The security market is very much just about supply chain, realizing how connected we are, and adding compliance and cyber assurance on top of that for managing risk. So those are some of the mega trends today. It's just dramatically different than it was when I started, back in the 90s. And it's an incredibly dynamic, exciting industry that I've been super fortunate to be involved with. So there, a little fast at the end. But.
No, it's great. It's great. And there are some questions that came through registration. I'd like to share those, but also maybe you could tell us a little bit about your customers, who they are, what their profile, maybe who your first customer was. Are they large companies, small, medium, just so we get a flavor.
Yeah, so first few customers were very large, and in security, oftentimes they're sensitive and you can't use their names. So the first customer was a gaming company who shall not be named. But having said that, there's a blessing and a curse with landing really big customers first. They can take you into your scaling journey very, very quickly. So for us, they basically said, innocently, like, scan all of our public buckets. And you look at it and you're like, oh, of course, like the stuff you have that's public out there can't be that much of that. It turns out it was petabytes of data and hundreds of millions and billions of objects. So, you naively walk into this massive scaling journey. And this is one of the big challenges of product is, do you go broad and try and cover a whole bunch of things, or do you go really deep into one problem set? And the answer is it depends. You have to have a deep understanding of the customer and what they need, and the market itself and what it's going to value. And that's really tough to do, especially when you're in the middle of a pandemic and you're trying to read the signals and so forth. So early customers were tech companies and manufacturers who had sensitive data and were primarily interested in containing data sprawl, but also interested in compliance, because compliance can be incredibly difficult. If you can't see your data or know where it is and what type you have, you can't protect it. So a lot of them, all the first use cases were, I can't see it show it to me so I can start to corral things. And there's terminology like toxic data or ghost data and so forth. And these are words we use to describe sensitive data that isn't where it should be. A lot of people say data is the new oil because it's so important. We don't lose sight of oil fields typically. The more functional analogy that folks use is plutonium, where it's a sensitive resource. It's incredibly important. If you don't handle it properly, it goes toxic, goes radioactive.
Interesting. I guess it leads to another question that came up, and that is, what kind of cybersecurity literacy would an executive level have, or should they have, and how could they go about learning about cybersecurity, and how involved are executives in your clients on your solution? Is it more like the cybersecurity team at the companies that you work with?
Yeah, we work more with the cybersecurity team. So they're called the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. We also work with cloud engineering. And this is one of the big shifts that's happened is in the early days of security, we worked with IT. It was, the person in IT who was responsible for security. Then what happened is we got real security teams. Who knew? Like you could, kind of partner up with IT. And then what happened is application and security and securing developers started to become more important until today, where that's a really big business where some of these companies aren't working with security teams per se. They're not working with IT teams at all. They're working with the developers. And then you've got organizations like us. Open Raven sells to the CISO, but we also sell to cloud engineering teams because the security teams in the cloud are hand in hand, and oftentimes are even security engineering, which means they're equal parts developer and operational security. And it's becoming such a huge, multiple, $300 billion market that's very compartmentalized in a way that it didn't. And the people who do industrial security and who protect, the power grid and so forth are also a very different world, and partner up with the people who are doing, operations management and so forth and handling the plants. So security has become as diverse as the things we protect in many instances. And the literacy that you need depends upon what you do. So I'll give you an example. If you're in marketing, there are privacy laws that you have to be conversant in that bleed over into security. And what I'll say is the downside of security is it's horribly complex and it's massive. The benefit of it is it's incredibly dynamic. So if you're starting from today, a lot of this history you don't even need to know about. You don't need to care about. It's changing, and recency is incredibly important. And I used the term before, check the expiration date on your idea. Like a lot of times people in this space, like they build up this dogma based on experience that was valid like 5 years ago that isn't valid now. And the complexity of security makes it daunting for people to get into, but the immediacy and the recency of it actually makes it pretty easy for people to get up to speed if you put in the energy. And, you need to get into the news. You need to read what's happening and listen to podcasts. It's part of the reason we do Security Voices. You want a primer on security? Go into Security Voices and pick a topic that interests you. Go into some of the better podcasts. There's one that's really fun. If you like NPR and that sort of thing, there's a guy named Jack Rysider who does the Darknet Diaries, which is very kind of cloak and dagger fun. He does an awesome job. And there's a bunch of other good ones too called Risky Business. I'm a podcaster, so I have a bias, but I think it's a very natural, easy way to ramp up. But if you're in marketing, you're going to bias towards data privacy and data security. If you're a CFO, you're going to want to focus on things that are related to a CFO around higher level risk and so forth, and business risk in that area. If you're a CIO, you're going to focus more on technical risk. The space is big enough to where you really do have to sit back and think about the risk. What are you worried about? If you don't know what you don't know and you don't know where to begin, there's folks who can sit down and do risk modeling with you and do a tabletop exercise to where you can start to tease out what are the things that are genuine risk to the business. And they're not all technical. Give an example, you need to probably do certifications and have cyber insurance in order to manage that business risk today. It's not okay not to have those things because the impact it could have in your sales cycle. you could be dragging down your sales cycle by not having the right certifications. That's genuine business risk. One of the first things I recommend to people, especially small businesses, they're like, well, what controls should we have in place? Have a second person that has to confirm your wire transfers. Because, if you get infected, you could have a big problem if you have an incident there, so you get popped. But I'll tell you, if you transfer $20 million off to, some place where it shouldn't be, and you can't get it back, you're super screwed, guaranteed. So, really sit back and think about risk. And if you don't know how to reason about it and think about it, pay someone to help you with it so that you can focus your attentions in the right area.
Great. Yeah, this is great. I guess I'd like to ask also, where are things heading? Like, where do you see things heading in the future? With where there's digital IDs are coming, digital currency, blockchain, all that. If it's, or that could be a complete different category. But where do you think cybersecurity is heading?
Oh wow, it's a huge question.
In 2 minutes.
Yeah, and in 2 minutes, gaze into your crystal ball and give me a precise answer in 120 seconds. Look, it's a lot of the cards are on the table now, and I think it's what's probably going to be like the near future is a continuation and visible. The further out things get very interesting. I think what you're going to see is there's a lot of things happening with our ability to work on secure data and on encrypted data. That's a big area. And I think we're going to see a lot more maturity out of data security and data privacy in the coming years. It's an early category, but you can see it really starting to build. And of course, that's the bet we're making at Open Raven. But there's also a ton of needs on data privacy. And there's a bunch of people working on this in terms of like multi-party computing and so forth. And, there's fascinating things happening in the world of data. And we're at the very early days of that. So look for a lot of maturity there. There's a lot of talk about quantum computing, which is still very early days. And I'll say what's not going to happen is you're not going to see quantum break the world's encryption and so forth. The academics are already working on things like lattice-based algorithms, which should be quantum resistant. So the fascinating thing that's happening now that I can tell you a lot of us are talking about and figuring out how to harness is resonant in GPT-3 and what's happening with OpenAI. So if you want a glimpse of the future and so forth, I could say a lot of things, but go use ChatGPT at OpenAI if you want a taste of where things are heading. It is mind-blowing. There's a few moments where you realize, oh my God, this is going to change everything. Maybe it was when you open an iPhone for the first time, or you name it. Go use ChatGPT at OpenAI and just ask it a question. I recently asked it, explain a security data lake to me as if I'm a botanist, and it was amazing. I literally worked it into my last podcast and used it as a silent kind of fourth participant. And we broke it at one point. It just got to the point to where it refused to participate. It was too busy. I asked the wrong questions, but it gives incredibly nuanced answers. And it's an incredible example of the role that AI is going to have in shaping cybersecurity and everything else.
Amazing. In 2 minutes, anyone have any questions for Dave before we conclude? Dave, this is fascinating. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited that this is being recorded because a lot of people are going to want to hear this information. But any questions from participants?
Hey, Dave, I had a quick question. First off, thank you so much for hosting this. I'm newly into product management, just graduated from the MBA program at Ross, and then started working for Duo Security. You mentioned Doug earlier.
Awesome.
And so I'm really kind of thinking about, you talked about developing that domain expertise and, going a mile deep. So any advice you have about, developing that over your career, especially earlier career?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd recommend is just keep doing it. Honestly, go deeper and deeper and be deliberate about each next step and what you want to learn. And I think, the best people in product, they talk with a lot of customers, and they also study. I use the podcast to force myself to get smart in a bunch of different areas. And I think line yourself up for speaking opportunities and other things like B-Sides is awesome. Like, Jack Daniel, my podcasting partner, started B-Sides, and there's a bajillion of them. And there's a super active community. Force yourself to like do the basics, but there's no substitute for repetition, right? Like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours, like it's a thing. You do 40, 50,000 hours, and then you have true mastery, and then things get super easy. Then you can start a company at entirely the wrong time, like I did. Somewhat kidding. But at the end of the day, like you have to challenge if you want to be superior, like, and if you don't, like, what fun is that? If you want to really be good at it, you've got to challenge yourself outside of that too. Go and speak and cross train on a topic, or go deeper into it and challenge yourself to write it down and communicate it. Train. Do a podcast. I have to do show flows and I have to research my podcast. It makes me better every time. So yeah, it's like, don't just do the job, train for the job and cross train for the job. And to me, that's what always makes you better, because it forces that second level of reflection and to go deeper. And instead of just doing it, get meta about it and think about how you're doing and what you're doing. And to me, that creates that's what makes you superior over time.
Awesome.
Great
Thank you so
advice.
much.
Great advice, Dave. Again, thank you so much for your time, Dave. It's been an amazing talk with you. I want to wish everyone a great weekend and a happy holidays and a very happy new year. And looking forward to 2023 around the corner.